Hello and welcome. Today I wanted to do a roundup of all the concealers that I've bought recently. So maybe a couple of months ago I decluttered a whole bunch of my concealers and foundations, and since then I've been accumulating some new concealers to replace those, and I've also got a couple of other complexion products I wanted to show you, a couple of color correctors and a shade adjuster that I've gotten, which is really great. So if you'd like to see all of that and just hear kind of mini reviews on all of these items, just keep on watching. So there have been a couple of issues, I guess, that have prompted me getting all of these items. One is that I've found out that I'm very sensitive to hyaluronic acid in skincare and makeup. It breaks me out. It gives me acne basically, and it's been kind of a gradual realization over even the last year or 2 years that it's an ingredient that my skin doesn't really like. And initially I thought it was in more concentrated amounts that it was really mainly an issue. I noticed using a couple of different masks and serums with hyaluronic acid in them that those really broke me out. One of those was the Chantecaille Gold mask. I used that one morning, and by the evening my skin was completely broken out with these really big painful kind of cystic acne spots. Another item that did a similar thing was the Glow Recipe Hyaluronic Serum. Same sort of thing. I used that one I think in the evening, and then in the morning I woke up with a bunch of acne. And this would be not only in this area, which is where I tend to get acne anyway, like I still get hormonal breakouts and so on, and it's mainly in the chin and jaw area. But I noticed when I was using those items, I would get acne, you know, even in unusual areas for me. So basically the rest of the face, so cheeks, forehead, and so on, which are not areas that I tend to get acne really ever unless it's a reaction to something. So with those realizations, I kind of started to stay away from it in skincare, but not in like a super committed way. So I wasn't looking up the ingredients of everything I was using and so on. And then when I started to consider that even makeup with hyaluronic acid might be breaking me out, the product that clued me into that was the Charlotte Tilbury Beautiful Skin Foundation, which came out pretty recently. I think I used that 2 days in a row, and I ended up with a lot of acne from that. And again, it was like not only in this area, although it was, you know, even worse than it normally would be in this area, but on other parts of my face as well. And that's when I really decided that I think hyaluronic acid is causing a lot of my breakouts. So I went through, I looked at the ingredients in basically all of my makeup. I missed a couple, but most of my makeup, and I decided to just simply declutter any makeup that I had that contained hyaluronic acid and kind of start fresh with some new items. Another issue that I had started focusing on around the same time was really trying to get complexion products that actually match my skin tone. I have very fair skin, and it can be really difficult to find complexion products that are light enough for me. And when I'm doing my makeup, I prefer to be able to match it to my neck actually, which is lighter looking than the skin on my face, because I have some redness on my face, which really makes the skin tone look darker than it actually is. So with those two criteria, basically wanting light enough complexion products, as well as, you know, the idea of perhaps trying to cancel out some of the redness to make it a little bit easier to find complexion products that'll work, as well as making sure I was getting products that didn't have hyaluronic acid in them. That was kind of how I approached getting all of these new items. So I thought I'd start with the more miscellaneous items, and then I'll move on to the actual concealers. So I decided that because redness is an issue with my skin, that green color correctors would make sense. I've also noticed that some of my foundations and concealers, mainly foundations, are too pink for me, basically. I've realized I'm not as cool toned as I once thought I was, and I probably have more of a neutral skin tone, but there is certainly some warmth and yellowness in my skin as well. So I've been trying to kind of move toward more neutral tones, more yellow rather than pink. And of course, putting a pink complexion product on top of already red skin is just going to kind of compound that issue. So I thought that green color correctors would be a really good thing to investigate. and I watched Hannah Louise Poston's video where she was packing up for her move, and she was basically creating a very small little collection of makeup that she was going to be using, and she mentioned in that she is currently testing out, or was then testing out, 4 different color correctors. And I think these are 2 of the ones that she was testing out: the NYX HD Studio Photogenic concealer and the Chanel concealer. It's their green color corrector. The NYX one I've had for several weeks now, and that's the main one that I've been using. I just got the Chanel one a couple days ago, and I've only used it once. So I can't speak too much about this one, but I'll swatch it for you anyway. But I found with the NYX one that it definitely works to cancel out the redness, and by doing so really kind of brightens up the complexion. It's kind of magical how well a green color corrector will work on red skin. So I've enjoyed that. I think it works very well. It wears nicely. I can get away with just wearing this if I don't want to put any other complexion products on. If I don't really want to wear any other makeup that day, I can get away with kind of just blending this out on the areas where the redness is most intense. But I found that after a few weeks of using this, actually, I don't know if the formula's dried out. That's what it seems like, that the formula has dried out a little bit. So it's not blending as easily, and it's just not as easy to use, basically. It takes more working into the skin and more blending than it did when I initially started using this from the fresh bottle. So that's my issue with this one, is that it seems to be just kind of drying out pretty quickly. And it remains to be seen, you know, whether the same thing will happen with the Chanel, but basically my hope is that that won't happen with this. And my first experience using this was positive. It was very easy to use, very easy to blend, but worked basically the same as the NYX. But the real test will be to see whether this continues to work just as well as time goes on and the formula gets a little bit bolder. I'm gonna swatch those in a minute, but I just wanted to go through the other kind of miscellaneous item in this, which is the Danessa Myricks Vision Cream Cover, and I got the white shade of this. So with this journey of trying to find light enough complexion products, I decided that it would really make sense for me to get a white adjuster so that I can just add that into really anything and lighten it up. And this has been amazing for that. I can take a foundation now that has a good undertone for me, but is, you know, too dark. So something like the Lisa Eldridge foundation in the shade 4, which I really like that shade. I love the undertones in that for me. They work really well, but it's definitely too dark for when my skin is at its palest. But I can just add a tiny, tiny little bit of this in. Super pigmented. I can just add a tiny little bit of this into that, or any other foundation that I find is even just a touch too dark, which, to be honest, most of my foundations are at least just a tiny touch too dark and can benefit from just a little bit of this when my skin is really pale. So I just take an amount like that. Even less actually is good because it's so pigmented, and this comes in a pump, so you can adjust how much you're pumping out of it. Just take that and mix it in with whatever foundation I want on the back of my hand, and it makes a perfect, really nice pale shade. I don't find that this really affects the finish of whatever foundation I'm using, which is great. It makes it a really good adjuster because you're not adjusting the formula of the foundation, but mainly just the color. But you can see even with that tiny little amount that I pumped out on the back of my hand, it's spread out like that, and it's still very opaque. So it probably adds a little bit of coverage as well, which is not a bad thing when you're trying to cover up discoloration and redness. And as I said, you can just use the smallest amount and you'll be all set with that. So let me swatch the green color correctors here too, so we can see those. I think they're pretty much the same color, and the formulas feel very similar in terms of their texture as well. There's the Chanel one, and that one is the NYX. They're the same color basically, but the Chanel one is lighter. It has more white in it by the looks of it, which means it might do an even better job at kind of brightening up. So those are those 3 products, and now let's move on to all of the new concealers that I've been trying. So the first concealer, and this is another one that was inspired by another YouTuber. Khaki from Khaki Reviews Beauty has been talking about this Item Beauty Air Hug Concealer, and she's had really positive things to say about it. So I decided I'd try it, and it's relatively affordable for a concealer you can get at Sephora. So I was quite eager to try it. It doesn't have hyaluronic acid, none of these products do, and it looked to be a really light shade, and it certainly is. I'm actually wearing this concealer under my eyes today. The formula is very nice on this. It's creamy, it's on the thicker side. It has a very good level of coverage, so it only takes a little bit. The doe foot applicator is kind of interesting. It's just kind of straight. It does have a little angle at the tip there, but it's kind of a little bit less nuanced in shape than a lot of other concealer applicators that I've seen, but it works great. That's what the color looks like. So that's the shade 100 of the Item Beauty Air Hug Concealer. And this is a really great one, you know, as you would typically use a concealer on top of foundation and so on. But I also think this works really nicely just on its own as the only complexion product that you wear if you want a little bit of a lighter or just quicker and easier makeup look. This works beautiful. It has a slightly dewy, radiant finish, which I really like. It wears beautifully all day long. I do tend to like to powder around my nose mainly, and when I do that, it wears really nicely throughout the whole day. So that's the Item Beauty Concealer in the shade 100. Just really easy to use, and I do especially like it for under my eyes because it's a bit of a peachier undertone, which is great for canceling out any kind of, you know, blue or purple shadows underneath the eyes. The next one is the Hourglass Concealer in the shade Birch. So this is a formula I had never tried before, but basically the reason I got it was also because of Hannah Louise Poston, because she compared it to the Rose Ink Concealer, which is her favorite, in the shade LX010, which is also the shade that I have of that concealer. But unfortunately, that concealer has hyaluronic acid, so I don't use it anymore. I still have it, just for shade comparison, so I will compare it to Hourglass Birch. But basically Hannah compared those two shades and they look to be fairly similar and to have a similar undertone. So this is one that has a little bit more of an olivey, you know, very neutral, quite muted undertone, which again can be great for canceling out redness. And when my skin is really, really pale, I do actually have a fake tan on today, so my skin looks slightly less ghostly than it usually does. But when my skin is really, really pale, it does have kind of almost a green yellowiness to it in the palest areas. So this is a great match for my skin when it's really pale. That's what it looks like there. The formula in terms of like the texture and the finish is quite similar, I think, to the Item Beauty one. It's just the tones that are really what differentiate these two to me, because they both have fairly good coverage levels. They're creamy, they're kind of a thicker feel, but they blend out really nicely and are kind of moisturizing on the skin. So let me go grab the Rose Ink one just so we can see it compared to Birch. So here's the Rose Ink in LX010. This, I would say, is more pigmented than any of these other concealers I'm showing you. This is the most pigmented concealer I've ever experienced. It's very, very highly pigmented, but a similar kind of feel and finish, creamy, more radiant finish. So I'm actually just going to wait for those comparison swatches to dry down a little bit and I'll move on to the next concealer. This is one, if you've been watching my videos, you may have seen me talk about this one already and demonstrate this. This is the Dior Backstage concealer. This is a pretty new release, and this is one that I've really been enjoying. This is another one that has a more kind of peachy tone to it, so similar to the Item Beauty one, but I would say the texture and the finish is different. This to me is a little bit more of a natural finish, maybe even leaning a little bit toward the matte side, but it is also highly pigmented. I have the shade 0N, by the way, which is again the lightest shade, or one of the lightest shades, and that's it right there. So that's the Dior Backstage concealer in 0N. I think it has a little bit of a thinner texture than the other two that I've swatched here, but very, very good. and really great coverage, wears really well. I particularly like to wear it on top of foundation, so I don't tend to wear this one on its own all that much. I just prefer the more kind of creamy, radiant formulas for that purpose, but I'm really happy with this one. This one looks great under the eyes especially, and again, it's a really nice light tone. So back to comparing the Hourglass to the Rose Ink. This is the Hourglass Vanish Concealer in Birch, and this is the Rose Ink Concealer in LX010. You can see that the tones are quite similar there, although I would say that the Hourglass looks a little bit more yellow than the Rose Ink, but very, very similar. I think if the Rose Ink is a shade that works really well for you, and for whatever reason, if you can't use it or you just wanted to try something new that has a similar tone, I think the Hourglass Vanish is a great option for that. Down to the last two, and these I kind of want to talk about simultaneously because I find their formulas very similar, and I basically only use these mixed together rather than on their own. One is the Rare Beauty Concealer. I have it in the shade 100W. The other is the KVD Good Apple Concealer in the shade Light 103. So the reason I use these together is because they each have very distinct, strong undertones to me. The Rare Beauty in 100W, as you might expect, it's a warm tone shade and it's quite yellow. The KVD one is a cool tone shade, and so it's quite pink, but when I mix these together, it's perfection. So I'm gonna show you each swatch on its own, and then I'm gonna do a swatch of them mixed together so you can see how they look. These I find to be quite matte. So the way I basically exclusively use these is to mix them together and mix in the Auric Glow Lust with them, and then I use that as an all-over complexion typically. I can do that concoction and just use it as concealer as well. The reason I went with both of these shades, but especially the Rare Beauty, I actually was able to swatch these in store and see what the colors really looked like. And so I swatched this next to the next two lightest shades in this range. And although one of them had a better undertone for me, it was significantly darker than this. And this was before I got into the Danessa Myricks white adjuster and so on. And I decided that I would prefer to just go for the lightest shade, and I could adjust the tone if I needed to. So here are those two shades. That one is the Rare Beauty in 100W, and this one is the KVD in Light 103. You can see those distinct undertones there, I think. So I wanted to show you them mixed together as well. And that's what they look like mixed together. So for me, that's a perfect, balanced, quite neutral tone, and it's super light too, which I really appreciate. All of these, I would say, are pretty high coverage, but adjustable in terms of how much you apply and how you blend them out, and if you're mixing them with other things as well. Just go through the list again. This one here is the Item Beauty Concealer in the shade 100. Next up, we have Hourglass Birch. This one is the Dior Backstage Concealer in 0N, the Rare Beauty in 100W, KVD Good Apple in Light 103, and then the mixture of the Rare Beauty and the KVD there. If I were going to get just one of these, I would probably get the Item Beauty one because the tone is pretty good just on its own without needing to be mixed with anything. Although for all over my face, I do find it a little bit peachy. Usually I will pair this one with the Hourglass, and I'll do this one like under my eyes, in areas where I don't really need to cancel out any redness or anything. And then I would use the Hourglass where I have a little bit more redness and I want my skin to be neutralized a little bit more. And these work really well together. So if I were to get two, probably it would be these two. But if I were just sticking to one, probably this one, because it's just super easy and the color is pretty good and it's really nice and light. So that's my overview of all my new concealers and adjusters and correctors. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. I always love to see those. And if you'd like to see more from me and you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I would really love for you to do so. Thanks again so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.